Well, greetings and welcome along to the Engineering Dreams.Space show. Today we have the privilege of talking with Emeline Paat-Dahlstrom. Welcome along to the show, Emeline. How are you?
Kiara, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you here. And look, a real privilege. I think any time I get to interact with those who are involved in the space sector, I think is a privilege, and especially those operating down under across Australia and New Zealand. Tell us a little bit about your background, because you've been involved in the space sector for decades across many different areas. How did you get involved in this whole world of space, Emeline?
So I started out, I'm Filipino, and I kind of like moved around in four continents before immigrating to the United States maybe about 25 years ago. And then I moved to New Zealand about 4 years ago under the Edmund Hillary program. My background's in physics and space science, but I really worked more on program development, operations, executive management, space education for about 3 decades, and then also working for space startup companies, specifically in the U.S., ranging from space tourism to startup companies that are vying to basically land on the moon and operate rovers as well on the moon. I've also worked quite a bit on space education, so the International Space University, also was space lead in Singularity University as well, and really just have been working in the new space sort of like ecosystem for quite a bit over the past 3 decades. And my passion really is in the democratization of space, and I can elaborate on that. But the premise here is that if we really think that space is the next frontier, we want everybody to be part of that global space economy, meaning not just the big spacefaring nations, but also everybody from emerging and developing nations. So my focus is to make sure that the rest of the world actually gets those benefits and opportunities.
Fantastic. And what was it that first, pulled you in and drew you to getting involved in the world of space and the new space area?
So from a very young age, I've really been interested in space. I was born during the Apollo era. So when we were basically landing humans on the moon. And way then also, I grew up with Star Wars and Star Trek. And the visionaries like Arthur C. Clarke, for example, wrote a book called The Challenge of the Spaceship back then. And I was, I think, about 12 to 14 when I read about it. And he was talking about, space stations and living off planet and satellites. And when he wrote that book, that wasn't even a reality yet. And so just like thinking about all of those things, I want that future and I want to be part of that future. And so that was really amazing that, like 10 years after that, I actually got a scholarship to go to the International Space University in France. And he was the chancellor of that university. If I were to talk to my 20-year-old self, I would never have imagined where I would be today back then, because there's not a lot of opportunities, especially in the Philippines at that time. But yeah, I've been passionate about space, and for me, I had to figure out like a way to get to where I'm where I'm interested in, and at least back then it was only physics. We didn't even have aerospace engineering. back then. So I knew I had to go and do a physics degree. But yeah, it's been a long journey. But it certainly is interesting to be now working in kind of like a dream that I've had since I was a kid.
Oh, that's yeah, it's incredible. And who were your influences? Were there other folks from Philippines that you looked to? Was it very much sort of looking at the US and other parts of the world? Were there women that were sort of excelling that you were able to look to for examples, or were there other people that you that you followed?
So yeah, I got kind of like most of my inspiration, I guess, through books and movies coming from the Philippines. And then when I got to when I attended the International Space University, the three founders, which included Peter Diamandis, and Peter Diamandis was still even a grad student when they started the institution. And during the first year, they got over 100 students from all different countries, countries that would normally not actually even talk to each other. Russia, China. I think his vision of where he thought the space industry should be is kind of what propelled me to really focus on new space. And in a way, my career kind of like followed his journey as well, because I worked for several of his startup companies. So I worked for the International Space University, or ISU, as well during the founding years. And then he also recruited me to work for Space Adventures. So Space Adventures this was back in like 1998, 2000, was really the very first space tourism company that can claim that they've actually sent, private paying passengers and citizens to space. Back then, you can only do it through the Russians.
Yeah, this is an incredible story. So, yeah, tell us about that. What was the beginning of space tourism like? Because I think many people think that space tourism is just is just starting now. But you've got the real story on this, right? So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so it's interesting that space tourism started over 20 years ago. And this company, which is basically a startup company, that I was recruited to be part of the kind of like the founding team. The premise was that, okay, we don't have the means to go up in space yet. So therefore, we're going to create like different types of analog terrestrial types of like space activities, from watching shuttle launches to doing astronomy type of activities kind of like on Earth, to prepare people who are like interested in space. And so we thought that suborbital flights, so suborbital meaning just going up and then coming back down, would be the first kind of like available activity for space and for passengers. But during that time, the International Space Station was also kind of like pretty new. And the only vehicles that could get you up there is the space shuttle and the Soyuz. So the Soyuz has basically 3 seats. And normally what happens is that every 6 months you have to swap the astronauts and the cosmonauts that are staying on the ISS. And with the Soyuz, they normally need only like 2 astronauts that's getting swapped. So there's a third seat that then became available with the price is right for a paying passenger to actually go. So that's sort of where Eric Anderson, who was the CEO of Space Adventures at that time, he was the one who kind of like thought, well, if we can broker the deal for the Russians to sell it to millionaires and those that can actually afford it, then this is a viable business. So that's sort of like actually what happened. And between 2001 to 2009, there's about 7 people who have gone up. The first person was Dennis Tito, who was actually an ex-NASA employee. And there's several others. So, for example, Charles Simoni, who is one of the Microsoft founders, he even went twice because he liked it so much. And the price is about between $20 to $50 million. So that's sort of like where everything happened. And then on the tail of that, also the same person, Peter Diamandis, also founded the X Prize Foundation. So the X Prize Foundation is this, he started out with a competition for the very first space company to actually develop and launch a fully private spacecraft to go up in space and then come back in 2 weeks' time. And so Spaceship One in 2004 actually won that competition. So that sort of started the suborbital space industry, because during that time as well, there were, I think, about 20 plus teams of suborbital companies, startup companies, who were trying to who were vying for the prize and were developing suborbital
That's right. Yeah.
vehicles, which then became the inspiration for like Blue Origin now, and of course Spaceship One. But space tourism certainly has happened for quite a while. But then just going fast forward to this year, and there's about 9 people that has gone up that are, well, you can potentially consider space tourists because they're not career astronauts that have gone up just starting from July. So we're kind of, I think, on an inflection point here, even just for the segment of space tourism. And I think we're going to see a lot more happening in the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time in history from that space tourism perspective, and I'm really, really curious what will come out of it. But certainly, the figures that you were mentioning around sort of 25 to 50 million to get into space just a few years ago, and obviously there's that whole picture is starting to change, depending obviously on whether it's a sort of suborbital trip like with Virgin Galactic etc., or whether it's actually going up into orbit as we saw with SpaceX. But yeah, certainly a really interesting time ahead. Now, you wrote a book, I think was maybe about 10 years ago about space tourism. I think before too many people were probably giving it too much attention. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was about between 2009 to 2011. The name of the book is Realizing Tomorrow: The Path to Private Spaceflight, and it's really a social history of the kind of like the development of private space flight and highlighting those kind of like unsung heroes that were actually part of the whole history of how we kind of like got here. It's interesting that private space has been around as well since like the 60s, and it's just that it's kind of like crawling along. And even when I ended the book, which was around around 2010, SpaceX and Elon Musk, I think he had his first successful rocket launch at that time, and it was pretty much a question mark, because for one, Elon, didn't come from a traditional like space background, and the space industry, at least at that time, the community is very, it's still very small, and he's just like an unknown. Some people think that he's crazy because, like, even people from the traditional space world was saying that he's crazy to start a company when most people have failed. And so at that point, I was basically at the end of that book. I was basically saying that if he actually becomes successful with this is going to be a big game changer and a disruptor, and will open up sort of new space as it should be, the commercial space that will then, I think, jumpstart us from a linear path to like an exponential one, which I think is already what you're seeing, what's happening the last 5 years. I mean,
agree.
for me, the first time I saw, like back in 2018, like, like reusable rockets. I mean, that was a holy grail before. Like that was something that people think, no, that's never going to happen. And in 2018, looking to see two Falcon rockets coming back down on the pad is just like pretty amazing. So it's an exciting time right now.
It certainly is, and I think you were spot on with with your thinking around Elon, and it's just incredible looking at the last few years. Certainly what SpaceX has achieved, but really I think there's a lot of companies realistically, and of course we hear about those that attract the most attention here in New Zealand. Of course, Peter Beck and the team at Rocket Lab have certainly been capturing a lot of attention, both locally and globally. But there's so much more, isn't there, to the space industry? Can you maybe sort of walk us through how you see that the sector as a whole has evolved and grown over the last few years? Because looking at Australia, looking at New Zealand, both countries are generating billions of dollars in export revenue around the field of new space. And some people probably don't even know what new space is. So maybe you could walk us through a little bit of your observations as to how things have changed, and what new space is all about.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because as you said, for one, the space industry today, I mean, it's no longer just rockets and rocket ships. Now, because it is the kind of the most visual and the most like exciting to kind of like look at, people always gravitate to that, and so therefore they think that that's just what it is. But I definitely see the whole space industry as a whole kind of like a bigger thing, where, so if you look at the global space economy, 75% of that is applications and specifically on the satellite space kind of like industry, and that also mimics. I think about 2 years ago, the New Zealand Space Agency put out a report on kind of like the space economy in New Zealand. The number is like about 1.7 billion. I'm sure that's now much bigger, after 2 years. And again, the same way, you'd think that Rocket Lab would have a big chunk of that 1.7 billion, but actually not. The bigger chunk is on the applications side of things. So which means that the barriers to entry for the industry is now much, much lower, because if it's applications, all you need really is a Wi-Fi and a computer and a way to analyze kind of like data. And data today, it used to be you'd have to buy. Of course, you still have to buy with certain commercial companies, but at the same time, government agents from all around the world are actually giving satellite data for free right now. And then the tools that you need to analyze the data used to be also in the tens of thousands of dollars that you would have to kind of subscribe to a platform. But today, those analytical tools are also open source and they're free. So again, like I would say that, yeah, if you have Wi-Fi and a computer and kind of like the aptitude to learn how to analyze, you can be kind of like part of the industry. The other thing to note as well is that if we believe that the future of humanity is really tied to kind of like our expansion, kind of like either off planet, then all of those terrestrial industries have an analog in space. So if you're for example, if you're part of of space agriculture, that has analogs in space as well, and you're just like continuing along the technology in extreme environments. So everything from infrastructure, habitats, architecture, medicine, these are all just the same kind of sub areas that there are opportunities to develop technology and then also to develop businesses and services in the space industry. So which is why I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity for everyone, not just for space engineers or aerospace engineers. You can be a lawyer, you can be an architect, you can be a biologist, and you can be part of the space industry as we kind of like as we go and expand.
Yeah, there seem to be so many new opportunities opening up for those that are interested in becoming involved in space, which is great, and it is fairly broad. Now, I'm just interested in drilling down a little bit into some of the opportunities that you see space bringing to us, because there's been a bit of a pushback with some of this sort of space tourism and during this window of time currently, where there's a huge focus on how we address issues around climate change, how we solve some of the world's problems, and Bill Gates was given some coverage in the last few days. And I guess challenging a little bit of this sort of thinking of billionaires wanting to shoot themselves off to other planets, when we have local things here on planet Earth that we need to be working on. And probably many people don't necessarily know how space helps us, but we're so reliant today, every single day, whether it's GPS. I think you mentioned before we started that you're using Starlink for this call. So this video, your voice is coming to us via space. And so this is the new world, and I find it, just incredible, the new things that it opens up, and just these LEO or low Earth orbit satellites, and the opportunities they create, and just how quickly actually new technology is able to come about in space, as the cost to put satellites up just seems to keep coming down. And I think of challenges that we've seen. I think in every country, with those who are outside of normal internet coverage, and in the past it was very, very limited. Satellite communications was certainly a key to be able to link them to the rest of the world, but it was very limited. Huge sort of delays in voice communications. Not really so good for video, and now here we are with Starlink and other competitors, lining up behind SpaceX to deliver. But there must be other areas, I'm sure, that have caught your attention and excite you in terms of the things that all these activities are facilitating or expecting to facilitate in the future. Any that you'd be happy to share with us?
Yeah, and maybe just to add on the Starlink thing, which is really exciting, especially as you mentioned, we're using it like right now, and this kind of like this service, which, like, if you're in a city, of course you've got fiber, and there's other opportunities for getting internet in a fast way, but this really opens up the rest of the world, which is like right now I think there's about 3 to 4 billion that are connected at the moment. But what happens to the kind of like the other half of the world that's actually not connected? And sometimes some of these areas are not connected because it's just the infrastructure to actually get either roads or like fiber or connectivity is just too insurmountable, and so therefore the opportunity of being able to have this kits of that you can actually just like have anywhere in isolated areas is a game changer for a lot of these communities that have never been or have never had this opportunity. Just imagine how education changes in this kind of like really remote and rural areas in different kind of like parts of the world. So I'm really excited about like how that will kind of like change as well the opportunities for those countries. So I just wanted to kind of like emphasize that. But in terms of, as you mentioned, there's a lot of kind of like criticism because the thing that is really so visible are kind of like billionaires going up and doing launches, but at the same time, as again we talk about the satellite space in kind of like segment of the industry where this is all looking down, and this is basically all of the sensors that are being developed today that are helping in many different aspects and challenges that are happening today. So one thing that actually for us that we're working on this year is that we're doing a Space for Planet Earth challenge. This is a competition for New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific Islands for university and secondary school students as well as startups, and it's leveraging satellite data to address some of the challenges that kind of like that we have for climate change. And for us, we've actually focused on carbon sequestration and coral health. So, for example, with carbon sequestration, we all know that global warming is basically kind of like caused by all of these greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere, and uh, basically one of the things to the best way to kind of capture is through carbon sequestration by biomass, so meaning forest and like native bush and so forth. But and so if we can quantify and measure it better. And right now, it's also still a big question mark for other biomass, like wetlands, seagrass, and different things. Then we can potentially have better ways of incentivizing, for example, carbon credits. For either New Zealand or for Australia. So that's like one thing that we're kind of like looking at. The other is that coral reefs, for example, is definitely the health of coral reefs is a big indicator of ocean warming as well as ocean acidification. And so if you can better quantify that as well, then it's also better for preserving. And so the other problem area of the challenge is also how can you measure better the coral health in regions, because again, sometimes it's hard to distinguish whether a live coral is alive or is that if it's dead and it actually has algae and so forth. So that's kind of one of the things that we're certainly working on at the moment. And if you're interested in participating, the end of the proposal is at the end of the month, and just go to spaceforearth.org. So that's kind of like one area. Last year, we also contributed to running another kind of like a sprint, which is called Data Quest, and it was focusing on wildfires. So in Australia, as well, of course, if you can mitigate by knowing and understanding more how wildfire spreads, and also how you can manage wildfire using satellite data. That's another kind of like tool that is really, really important, kind of like to the region. So that's another thing that satellite data in cooperation with like AI and machine learning will definitely advance sort of like our management of that. There are also satellites that are, Earth observing satellites that are kind of like looking at illegal things that are happening in kind of like in the oceans. And so, for example, there are the kind of like the shipping traffic around like globally is being monitored by satellites. The fishing kind of like fleet is being monitored by satellites. And so if there are kind of activities that look suspicious or not kind of like within the norm, satellites can actually detect those and understand and see where piracy or illegal fishing is kind of like happening around the world. And now that also that we got so many Earth observing satellites, and with for example the constellation Planet, they can image sort of the entire world every day now, and so therefore they can find all of those illegal activities very easily now, from illegal logging in the Amazon, to just looking at the devastation that's happening there through industrial waste and so forth. And then again, just if you want to know what the weather is, I mean, you go look at your phone And we wouldn't have that information if we had no satellites today. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that we depend on every single day because of space technology, and we just take it for granted. Because they're kind of like almost not visible,
We
and
do.
kind of like you just think that they're the norm.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're 100% right there, and yeah, it is interesting that as new technologies, new innovations come along, we so quickly take them for granted, and we often lack giving any recognition to those that have worked so hard over an extended period to to come up with these things. And yeah, when we look at space, I don't think that a lot of us really fully recognize how much we rely on satellites for so many things today. And yeah, some great examples there. These are really important things, and yeah, I'm really excited about the Space for Planet Earth challenge. Always very interested to see what new ideas and innovations come through when you create those opportunities for innovation to happen for creativity. And of course the technology has been moving at a rapid pace, and the things that we're now taking for granted, like the reusable rockets and so on. Yeah, these things have come about in a very, very recent times, and now it's just the norm.
Yeah.
It's it's funny. I was encouraging my son to watch SpaceX launch the other day, and it was so funny. He's, I don't need to watch that. That's nothing new, sort of thing. And yeah, these things are just becoming so commonplace, which is amazing. So where to from here? What why is it that you've decided to base yourself here in New Zealand? What sort of vision and view do you have for the space industry in this part of the world? What are the things that you see going forward, Emeline?
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because we kind of like we talk about a sustainable space ecosystem, and there are elements for having a sustainable space ecosystem, and New Zealand actually ticks all of the boxes. If you kind of like compare it to other places, sort of like around the world, and that kind of like means that for one, you've got a really progressive government here that really caters to the success of like the space industry, which I think is fantastic, coupled with its kind of like environmental values as well, and sustainability focus, which is great. The other thing, of course, is that now that Rocket Lab also is here, it means that it's a spacefaring nation. It's one of the, I guess, 11 countries that can now launch to space. So therefore, you've got the infrastructure, and then also just location wise, it's really ideal for polar orbiting launches, which is sort of the bulk of the satellite launches kind of like today. And then there exists also already an existing entrepreneurial and educational kind of like ecosystem that will help the industry grow as well. But I think one of the most important thing I think that I really love is the Kiwi mentality for innovation, entrepreneurship, and ingenuity. So for me, I think this notion of the number 8 wire, and just the penchant for trying out like impossible things, it's really kind of, I think it's inherent in the culture, which is super fantastic. Because I mean, I only see this sort of like, for example, in Silicon Valley, where it's just like one part, while in New Zealand it's really the entire kind of like nation. So I think all of those kind of like contributes to why I can actually see, even just from the time that we arrived here in 2017, and it's been 4 years, kind of like now, where I see all of this development that has happened, and also the startup companies that are actually happening. I normally have I have a presentation chart where I kind of like show all of the startup companies that are popping up kind of like all over the country. And they're not just, it's not just another satellite company, or it's just another rocket company. They're actually very much like a pioneer in themselves, and the technology that they're developing could be disruptors in the future if they become successful. So I actually see a lot of really great things that could happen in New Zealand, so which is sort of like one of the reasons why we picked to kind of like be here, because it does have all of those elements. And as I mentioned, going back to my personal goal of making sure that the rest of the world actually have the benefit and the opportunity to be part of the global industry. I want to be able to share kind of the lessons learned of what we're trying to do here to the rest of the world, who also would want to have a thriving ecosystem for kind of like for the future.
Fantastic. Well, it's fantastic to have you here in New Zealand. Maybe before we finish up, you can just tell us a little bit about Space Base, and why people should visit the website, and what sort of resources are there to be found.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we came to New Zealand 4 years ago under the Edmund Hillary program, and with the notion of the democratization of space. And so this is kind of like the genesis of incorporating Space Base here. Space Base is a social enterprise, really to grow the space ecosystem. And we've been doing that through education, entrepreneurship, and then community building as well. So on the education side, we've given like over 100 presentations kind of all over the country, doing outreach from primary to tertiary kind of like education. But we've also created like a training program and a workshop where if a region or a city would want to be interested in seeing and how to assess becoming part of the industry, that's something that we're interested in working with those like stakeholders. We've been delivering space competitions with partners since 2018. So this is the third time that we're doing one with the Space for Planet Earth Challenge. We've been mentoring startups as well here and also abroad. And then for our community building kind of like efforts through our consulting service. We also do due diligence for investment firms. We consult for local government on basically business attraction to strategy as well. And we do kind of like a lot of different things. We created the New Zealand Aerospace Directory. So yeah, if you're part of the industry, would love to have you in the directory as well. I also do a monthly podcast to kind of like inspire the next generation and also see what other kind of like space pathways for students and new entrepreneurs. So it's at spacebase.buzzsprout.com. And there's
Right.
also a light version of that that workshop that I was talking about earlier on the assessment, which is on Thinkific. That sorry, spacebase.thinkific.com
Okay.
as well. So yeah, the website is spacebase.co.
That's
And
brilliant. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
would be great to keep you.
Well, thank you so much, Emeline. I know there is so much more that we could delve into with you. You have so much knowledge on the space industry, but it has been a real privilege to hear from you today. And we'll look forward to next time. Thanks everybody for joining us, for listening in, and for those that have watched the video. It's been really appreciated to have you joining us. You can find the show. We are Engineering Dreams.Space is the organisation behind this show and the podcast, and that is also the URL to the website. So thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks again, Emeline.
Thank you, and kia ora.